In the quiet gallery of the Yale University Art Museum, I was focused on preparing a new exhibition. The soft, early summer sunlight filtered through the high windows, subtly reflecting on the frames of the 17th century Flemish paintings. As a curator, these moments of intimate connection with the artworks were my greatest satisfaction. "Olivia, do you have a moment?" My sister-in-law Ashley's voice, coming through my cell phone, made me pause my work. Her wedding was in 2 weeks, and she had been calling frequently to discuss the preparations. "Of course, Ashley. What's up?" "Well, it's about the venue." I noticed her voice lacked its usual cheer. I'd heard that my mother-in-law had taken the lead in choosing the venue. What they didn't know was that my family owned Morgan Libris, a chain of luxury wedding halls in Connecticut. I never mentioned this to Daniel's family because I didn't want them to judge me based on my background. I thought about how I met Daniel, a pediatrician at Yale New Haven Hospital. We first crossed paths at an art therapy program for children at the museum. From the beginning, I was drawn to his genuine nature and his interest in my project. I wanted our relationship to be based on who we truly were, not my last name or social status. That's why I chose not to say anything about my family's business. A year after our wedding, I remembered that day. Even then, my mother-in-law, Catherine, maintained her elegant, high society smile, though her cold eyes said something else. As a model and a regular figure in exclusive circles, perhaps she thought a museum curator wasn't good enough for her son. "They've decided on Morgan Celebrations," Ashley said. I held my breath. It was my family's venue, and they had chosen the most prestigious location in Greenwich. "Mom insists it has to be there, but the budget." I closed my eyes silently. I already knew what was coming. My parents had told me when my mother-in-law went for the tour. My dad recognized her and, wanting to be kind, offered the $50,000 package at a special price of $5,000, telling her we were family now. But instead of being surprised or grateful, my mother-in-law took it as if it were the least she deserved due to her social status. My parents didn't say anything, surely thinking of my situation. "Don't worry, Ashley. It will be a beautiful wedding." After hanging up, I stared out the window, lost in complicated thoughts. My husband, Daniel, tried not to get caught between his mother and me, avoiding family matters whenever he could. However, although at the hospital as a pediatrician, he handled emergencies with firmness, when it came to family matters, he became almost too cautious. That night, my husband arrived exhausted and leaned on me as soon as he walked through the door. I heard from Mom about the venue. His voice had a tinge of worry. I squeezed his hand in response. "It's okay, it's Ashley's special day." But something bothered me. The hall staff knew I was the owner's daughter. What would happen when my mother-in-law found out? That day, I shook my head, trying to dispel the feeling of uncertainty. I sighed deeply as I imagined the refined hall in Greenwich bathed in the golden summer sunlight. When I returned to the museum, it was already late afternoon, and the exhibition preparation was barely underway. I turned my attention back to the Flemish paintings, trying to refocus my mind. Art has a curious power. It calms the thoughts and helps one see things more clearly. 2 weeks until the wedding. Unlike the calm of the gallery, I could feel a storm brewing. Still, I decided to trust in my husband, in love for family, that everything would work out. The morning of the wedding dawned fresh and bathed in soft summer light. The imposing Morgan Libris building, located in the exclusive residential area of Greenwich, gleamed under the morning sun. Its architecture, reminiscent of a European castle, stood out even in that luxurious neighborhood. Dressed in an elegant navy blue Carolina Herrera dress, I drove towards the hall alone. Daniel had left early for the preparations. While driving, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Impeccable makeup, hair in place. Despite having visited that place countless times, this morning something felt different. A strange tension invaded me as I approached the entrance. From the car, I observed the staff moving busily back and forth. An arch of white roses and lilacs decorated the main entrance with impeccable elegance. Beneath it, security guards dressed in black greeted the guests courteously. Everything emanated that meticulously calculated perfection. I parked in the designated spot and took a deep breath. I had to spend the day with a smile. That would be the best gift for Ashley. I repeated this to myself as I released the steering wheel. "Good morning," the security guard greeted politely as he opened the door. The venue staff, who knew this was my family's business, normally treated me with special respect, but surely my dad had instructed them to treat me like any other guest. "Today, I'm Olivia Brown," I announced in a calm voice. The guard checked his tablet and then checked it again. His expression changed to one of confusion. My heart began to beat a little faster. "I'm so terribly sorry, but your name is not on the list." For an instant, time seemed to stop. There must be a mistake. I'm the bride's sister-in-law. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I felt it threatening to tremble. Around us, guests began to arrive, some wearing brands like Oscar de la Renta and Calvin Klein, casting curious glances at us. The guard checked the tablet once more before shaking his head apologetically. "I'm very sorry, but you're definitely not on the list." And at that moment, I understood everything. This hadn't been a simple oversight. Silently, I took my cell phone out of my purse and dialed my mother-in-law's number. After 3 rings, her distinctive voice answered. "Oh, Olivia, why are you calling so early?" Her tone had a distinct tinge of satisfaction. Aware of all the stares on me, I replied as calmly as possible. "Catherine, it seems my name is not on the list." There was a brief pause. "Ah, yes. You actually came? Well, the family section is only for the real family." Her words were accompanied by an elegant, mocking laugh. Something inside me froze. "But I'm Daniel's wife." "Yes, on paper, but you're still not adequate enough." I closed the phone silently. It was then that I noticed my hands were trembling slightly. I took a deep breath. The security guard was still standing in front of me, clearly uncomfortable. Around me, the murmurs of the guests increased. "Isn't she the bride's sister-in-law? They're denying her entry. Is there some family problem?" Through the entrance hall, I caught sight of Ashley walking toward the makeup room in her pure white Vera Wang wedding dress. She hadn't noticed me. If she found out about this now, her special day would be ruined. I took my cell phone again. This time, I dialed my family's number. "Dad." My voice barely trembled, but upon hearing his next words, I felt an enormous relief. "I'm on my way. I'll bring the lawyer." My dad's voice sounded firm, with an implacable determination that contrasted with his usual gentleness. I closed my eyes gently. "Dad, please don't rush anything. The ceremony isn't for another hour." "I understand, but I can't leave you waiting any longer." After hanging up, I sat on a bench near the entrance. The navy blue of my Carolina Herrera dress elegantly reflected the morning light. In front of me, guests continued to arrive, entering the premises as if nothing were amiss. While organizing my thoughts, I couldn't help but reflect on family and my own place in it. Had I made the right decision by not revealing my family's business? How would this incident affect my relationship with Daniel? I understood what my dad meant by bringing the lawyer. It wasn't just about revenge. This was the moment when the truth, hidden for so long, would finally come to light. Almost an hour had passed. During that time, my husband had called me 3 times, but I didn't answer any of his calls. I wanted to wait for my parents to arrive before explaining everything to him. From a distance, a majestic black Rolls-Royce Phantom appeared. It was the car that my family only used on special occasions. The vehicle gleamed under the morning sun as it approached with an imposing presence. I could make out James, our old friend, at the wheel. The car glided to a stop at the main entrance. The first to get out was Michael Steinberg, dressed in an impeccable gray suit. He had been my dad's friend for over 30 years and the legal advisor to the Morgan family. From the back seat, my parents made their appearance. My dad, William, wore a navy blue Brooks Brothers suit with an even more imposing expression than usual. My mom, Margaret, wore a Chanel suit with the elegance and bearing of British royalty. "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting, Olivia." Her voice maintained its usual warmth, but also a firm determination. The staff couldn't hide their nervousness at the sudden appearance of the venue's owners. The security guard who had previously denied me entry bowed quickly. "Mr. Morgan, you." My dad gave him a slight glance before nodding calmly and walking forward. "Daughter, I'm sorry you had to go through this." As soon as I heard those words from my father, tears started to well up in my eyes, but I quickly wiped them away with the handkerchief my mom offered me. "Let's talk to your mother-in-law first," my mom suggested. My dad nodded silently, and Lawyer Steinberg adjusted his grip on the thick stack of documents. At that moment, a commotion arose in the entrance hall. Looking up, we saw my mother-in-law, Catherine, standing on the second-floor balcony, dressed in an Oscar de la Renta suit. "What business do you have here? We're in the middle of a wedding." Her voice still sounded confident, but her expression froze at my father's next words. "Actually, we own this venue, and a serious matter has arisen regarding the current contract." The atmosphere changed instantly. I saw my mother-in-law's hand tremble slightly as she gripped the balcony railing. "You mean you are Mrs. Catherine?" Lawyer Steinberg stepped forward. "The regular price of today's wedding package is $50,000. If the conditions of the current special discount are voided, you'll have to pay the difference of $45,000 immediately." The color drained from my mother-in-law's face. Behind her, on the balcony, my father-in-law, Richard, put a hand on her shoulder, visibly worried. Beyond them, in the second-floor hallway, I saw my sister-in-law, Ashley, in her wedding dress, not understanding what was happening. "What's going on?" Her voice trembled as she asked. Suddenly, we heard hurried footsteps descending the stairs. Turning around, there was my husband, Daniel. His expression reflected a fury I had never seen in him before. "Mom, why did you do this?" His voice resonated in the silent space. Catherine couldn't meet his gaze. "Our social status is sufficient," she tried to say, but Daniel interrupted her. "As of today, I'm cutting ties with my family." "Daniel, you can't be serious." My mother-in-law's voice cracked. "I mean it. I can't forgive the way you've treated Olivia." My mother-in-law's knees buckled, and my father-in-law rushed to hold her. Ashley covered her face with both hands. With only 30 minutes to the ceremony, the wedding was on the verge of disaster. My father began to climb the stairs silently, with an imposing presence, almost like that of a high society king. My mother and Lawyer Steinberg followed closely behind. I stayed on the first floor, observing the scene. "Dad," I whispered softly, "please handle this carefully." But it was already too late. Everything had progressed beyond the point of no return. The light of the enormous chandelier shone upon the lobby, a silent witness to the drama unfolding. The venue staff and guests held their breath, attentive to every movement. From the waiting room upstairs, we heard Ashley's muffled cries. I felt my chest tighten. I knew how important this day was for her, and now everything was falling apart. Meanwhile, my father and my mother-in-law were about to face off in a conversation that would undoubtedly change our lives forever. I sighed deeply and began to climb the stairs with slow, firm steps. The heavy door of the waiting room closed silently, sealing the tense atmosphere that filled the room. Everyone involved was there, gathered in the luxurious lounge decorated with high-end furniture. My mother-in-law, Catherine, was sitting on the edge of the sofa, nervously adjusting the cuff of her Oscar de la Renta suit. Beside her, my father-in-law, Richard, held her slightly trembling hands. "Mrs. Catherine," my father's voice was low but firm and full of determination. "What do you think of this situation?" My mother-in-law lowered her gaze for a moment. When she raised it again, she seemed to have made a decision. "I was wrong." Her voice no longer held the arrogance of before. Ashley was still sobbing in her pure white wedding dress. Her fiancé, James, was standing next to her with a hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her. His expression reflected a mixture of confusion and sadness. "Brother, please," Ashley spoke with a trembling voice, addressing Daniel. "Don't cut ties with Mom." I watched silently as the scene unfolded. I had the feeling that something was about to change drastically at that moment. Then, my mother stepped forward gracefully and began to speak in a soft voice. Ashley, I'm so sorry. We've turned your special day into this. With those words, the tension in the room eased slightly. It was my mother's mysterious power. In any difficult situation, she had the ability to calm hearts with her elegant demeanor and her words full of reflection. But this isn't just about a wedding, Steinberg continued as he reviewed his documents. It's a serious breach of contract and affects the reputation of Morgan Celebrations. At that moment, I made my decision. I stepped forward. Please forgive them. Just for today. Everyone in the room turned to look at me. This is Ashley's special day. She isn't to blame for any of this. My father frowned. But Olivia, the way they treated you, I understand. I replied in a serene voice. But we are family. Maybe this is an opportunity to build new ties. Here and now. Daniel walked to my side and took my hand gently. Olivia, his voice reflected love and pride. Suddenly, my mother-in-law stood up and approached me. For the first time, I saw sincere emotion in her eyes. Olivia, the words caught in her throat as a tear rolled down her cheek. I was a fool. I realized my stupidity. You truly are the right person for my son. With that confession, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Ashley stopped crying, and her fiancé, James, sighed with relief. After a moment of silence, my father made his decision. All right, he said firmly, looking at lawyer Steinberg. Let's establish new payment terms. We could cover the remaining $45,000 in 60 monthly installments. My father-in-law, Richard, proposed in a low voice. We'll make sure to pay each month without fail. My father pondered the proposal for an instant and then nodded slowly. All right, let's draft a new contract. My mother-in-law bowed her head deeply. Thank you. And I am so sorry. Ashley ran to me and hugged me tightly. Olivia, thank you. Her voice trembled between tears and joy. But Daniel's expression was still severe. Mom, even after today's wedding, our relationship won't easily return to normal. My mother-in-law lowered her gaze. I understand. Please give me the opportunity to regain your trust, little by little. Outside the window, we could see the guests continuing to arrive nonstop at the venue. A slight scent of white roses floated in the room. Then my mother spoke enthusiastically. Let's make this a wonderful wedding. I'll put all my skills as an event director of Margaret Morgan to work. At those words, Ashley's face lit up. You mean the very Mrs. Morgan? My mother smiled gracefully. Yes. Since this is a special occasion. Immediately, the staff began to move hurriedly, receiving new instructions from my mother. I squeezed Daniel's hand tightly. He nodded silently, returning the gesture. After having overcome this crisis, our family ties were entering a new stage. However, there was still a long road to reconciliation. It wouldn't be easy, but at this moment, in this place, we had taken an important step forward. My mother-in-law stood in front of the mirror to touch up her makeup. Her expression no longer showed the arrogance of before. In her eyes, regret and hope intermingled. My father put the final signature on the documents and closed his fountain pen. The sound seemed to announce the beginning of a new chapter. Well then, let's make this a magnificent wedding, my mother said warmly, enveloping the entire room with her voice. Through the window, the clear Greenwich sky stretched across the horizon. The summer light gently illuminated the new ties we had built as a family. I breathed deeply. This was just the true beginning. A year later, the Brown Mansion in the exclusive residential area of Greenwich had completely changed. That cold and domineering atmosphere had disappeared, and in its place now felt a warm and welcoming ambience. In the garden, the newly planted roses bloomed, filling the air with their fragrance, which the summer breeze gently spread. Daniel and I had moved to a new house in a quiet neighborhood of New Haven shortly after Ashley's wedding. It was only a 15-minute drive from the Yale University Art Museum, near the hospital where my husband worked. Our new life brought us the peace and stability we so desperately needed. My mother-in-law had also changed drastically since that day. Little by little, She left behind the luxurious social gatherings and instead began to volunteer at local organizations supporting children in vulnerable situations. The change was so natural that it surprised everyone. When I'm with the children, it reminds me of when Daniel was little, she confessed during a lunch we shared recently. Her eyes no longer reflected the haughtiness of before. The monthly payments were made punctually without any delay, but more than a financial obligation, it was a real sign of her commitment to amend her mistakes and build a new relationship with us. Ashley and James started their new life in San Francisco. From time to time, they sent us photos of a small sushi restaurant run by a Japanese chef they met there. "The table manners Mom taught me are serving me well here," she wrote in a message, filling my mother-in-law's face with joy. Perhaps the biggest change was her dedication to charitable works. She used her connections to establish a scholarship program for children from low-income families. When my father heard about her initiative, he decided to support her through Morgan Libris. "People really can change," my mother said one day. "All because you had compassion." At that moment, I realized what happened at that wedding was a turning point for our family. But it wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. This spring, I received a letter from my mother-in-law. Her elegant calligraphy reflected deep reflection and hope. "Olivia, every time I think about that day, my heart aches because of my stupidity. However, thanks to your compassion, I was able to realize what truly matters in life. My son's happiness doesn't depend on social status or appearances, but on sincere relationships with his loved ones." At the end of the letter, there was an unexpected proposal. She wanted to organize a family dinner at the Greenwich Mansion during Christmas weekend. "This time, please let me be the one to receive you with all my heart." Those words filled me with warmth. Last weekend, we accepted my mother-in-law's invitation and had dinner together for the first time in a long time. The table was set with her favorite porcelain tableware, and the chef had prepared elegantly presented dishes. However, what impressed me most was my mother-in-law's natural smile. There was no longer any trace of that constant worry about appearances or social standing. She was simply enjoying time with the family. She seemed like a completely different person. It all started when they served dessert. After a slight pause, she continued, "I was wondering if I could organize a charity event for children within the Morgan celebrations." My father immediately agreed, and my mother, with a smile, offered her cooperation. Ashley participated via video call, and excitement was reflected in her eyes. "It's a wonderful idea," I replied sincerely. The scent of roses from the garden floated in the dining room as dusk fell. Daniel gently squeezed my hand and nodded. It was a moment in which the ties we had built over the last year took shape in a tangible way. Later, while preparing a new exhibition at the Yale University Art Museum, I suddenly realized something. Our lives are like the paintings in this museum. Sometimes they can be covered in dark hues, but when the light illuminates them from another angle, they show a completely different expression. My mother-in-law is now beginning to see her life in a new light, and we, too, continue to paint together our masterpiece called Family. Outside the window, the early summer sunlight spilled over the museum garden as if blessing our new story.